In 1821, a 15-year-old boy from the Yorùbá people was torn from everything he knew: his village, his family, his language. Slave traders had raided his home in what is today southwestern Nigeria, and within days he found himself chained on a ship, being taken toward a life of forced labor in a foreign land. His name was Samuel, and he had absolutely no idea that his story, one that began in the darkest possible way, would one day change the entire direction of Christian history in West Africa. What makes Nigeria's story different from any other in this series is this: most countries received the gospel through missionaries who came with Bibles, built churches, and went home. Nigeria received the gospel that way too. But then something happened that nobody planned. The Nigerians took that gospel, wrestled with it, questioned it, adapted it, made it their own, and then turned around and started sending it back to the rest of the world. Today, Nigeria is home to the largest single Christian congregation on the planet, 50,000 people. One church, every single Sunday. What makes this story genuinely remarkable is the question at the center of it. A question the first Nigerian Christians had to answer with their lives. Can you separate Jesus from the empire that brought him? Can you receive a faith that arrived wrapped in colonialism, carried by the same people who enabled the slave trade, and still find something true and transforming inside it? The answer Nigerian believers gave to that question is one of the most courageous acts in the history of the church. And it produced something the world had never seen before. This is the story of how Christianity came to Nigeria, how it survived, how it was transformed, and how it transformed everything it touched. 5 chapters, one extraordinary journey, from a 15-year-old boy in chains to the largest church in the world. Stay with me, because this story is just getting started. Before any missionary ever set foot on Nigerian soil, before any Bible was translated into Yorùbá or Igbo, there were kingdoms. Powerful, sophisticated kingdoms with their own laws, their own armies, their own answers to the great questions of existence. The kingdom of Benin in the south was so advanced that its craftsmen produced bronze works of a precision that left European explorers speechless. The Sokoto Caliphate in the north was one of the largest Islamic empires in the world. Nigeria was not an empty space waiting to be filled. It was a complete world, and a deeply spiritual one. In the south, the Yorùbá people lived within one of the most complex and fascinating cosmologies in human history. They believed in 401 deities, the Orishas, each responsible for a dimension of life: thunder, iron, love, healing, destiny. Above them all stood Olodumare, the supreme god, creator of everything. What is extraordinary is that the first missionaries who arrived in Yorùbá territory were stunned to discover that this people already believed in one supreme God above all others. The soil, in many ways, had already been prepared. In the north, Islam had arrived centuries before any Christian missionary. Since the 11th century, Muslim traders had traveled the trans-Saharan routes, bringing not just goods, but faith, and that faith had taken deep root. When the Fulani leader Usman Dan Fodio launched a jihad in the early 19th century and founded the Sokoto Caliphate, northern Nigeria became one of the most powerful Islamic centers in all of Africa. Any gospel that arrived would have to find its way in that context, not as a replacement, but as an encounter. This was the soil when the gospel would be planted, not empty soil, but soil already full of faith, of questions, of deep spirituality. And that is precisely why what happened next was so extraordinary. Because the gospel didn't come to Nigeria to fill a void. It came to meet a people who were, in many ways, already searching. If this story is already pulling you in, and we haven't even gotten to the slave boy who became a bishop yet, hit subscribe. This trail is just beginning. In 1821, Samuel Ajayi Crowther was 15 years old when slave traders raided his village. He watched his family being torn apart right before his eyes. He saw neighbors fall. He saw everything he had ever known disappear in a matter of hours. He was chained, pushed onto a slave ship, and taken out into the open sea, not knowing where he was going, not knowing if he would survive. And then, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the unthinkable happened. A British Navy vessel intercepted the ship. Samuel was freed, 15 years old, alone on a strange continent, and with an entire life ahead of him that nobody, absolutely nobody, could have predicted. He was taken to Freetown, Sierra Leone, where he found missionaries, schools, and, for the first time since the day his village was destroyed, a community. He was baptized in 1825. He studied with a dedication that left everyone around him astonished. He learned English, Greek, Hebrew, and then he did something few would have had the courage to do. He went back to Nigeria, not as a slave, not as a victim, but as a missionary. Picture the scene. The same young man who had left in chains, now returning, carrying not shackles, but a Bible. And not just any Bible. One he was translating himself into Yorùbá, the language of his childhood, the language of his mother, the language that had been stripped from him, along with everything else. Word by word, verse by verse, Samuel gave his people back the possibility of meeting God in the same language they had learned to cry in. In 1864, he was ordained as the first African Anglican bishop in history, a former slave. A bishop. That is the heart of all Christian history in West Africa, the gospel arriving not just through well-meaning foreigners, but through the hands of someone who knew his people's pain from the inside. When the gospel is preached by someone who suffered alongside you, it sounds different. It sounds true. And Nigeria listened. Here is the tension that no history book can easily resolve. The missionaries who brought the gospel to Nigeria arrived in the same period, and often on the same ships, as the traders, colonial administrators, and soldiers of the British Empire. The Bible and the flag came together. And Nigerians noticed. They noticed that the same man who preached about the love of Christ on Sunday could turn a blind eye to the injustices of colonialism on Monday. That contradiction did not go unnoticed, and it created a question that would define the future of Nigerian Christianity. Does the gospel belong to the colonizer, or is it big enough to belong to everyone? The answer Nigerian Christian leaders gave to that question was radical. Instead of rejecting the gospel along with colonialism, they did something far more courageous. They separated the two. Leaders like James Johnson and other African pioneers began creating independent churches, led by Africans, that preached the same Jesus, but in a language, a music, and a structure that belonged genuinely to Nigerian culture. It wasn't rejection. It was appropriation in the best sense of the word. They were saying, Jesus belongs to no one people, and we want him. What was born from that process is what researchers today call African independent Christianity. a movement of churches that grew alongside the European missions, with their own theology, their own worship, their own leadership. These churches didn't ask London for permission to preach the gospel. They didn't wait for foreign bishops to approve their baptisms. They simply moved forward with a conviction that came from within, not from outside. And they planted seeds that decades later would blossom into a movement that would leave the entire world speechless. But this was only the first step. What happens next in the 20th century is almost impossible to believe. Keep watching. The trail goes much deeper. In the early 20th century, something began stirring in Nigeria that nobody had planned, nobody had organized, and nobody could fully explain. It started quietly, in small prayer meetings, in village gatherings, in the homes of ordinary Nigerians who had encountered the gospel and couldn't keep it to themselves. But by the middle of the century, it had become something else entirely, a fire. And like every fire that finds the right conditions, it spread in ways that defied every human calculation. Researchers who study Christian history call what happened in Nigeria in the 20th century one of the most remarkable religious explosions in recorded history. And they are not exaggerating. The engine behind this explosion was Pentecostalism, a movement that emphasized the direct, personal experience of God through the Holy Spirit. Prayer, healing, worship that moved the entire body, not just the mind. For a people whose spiritual traditions had always been participatory, physical, communal, this was not a foreign concept. It was a homecoming. Nigerian Christians didn't just adopt Pentecostalism, they accelerated it. They took it further than anyone in the West had imagined possible. Churches that began with 20 people grew to 20,000, then to 200,000. The Nigeria largest church in the world, Winners Chapel, also known as Faith Tabernacle, built an auditorium capable of holding 50,000 worshipers under one roof. 50,000. Every Sunday. But the number that truly stops people cold is not the size of the churches. It's the direction of the missionaries. For centuries, the flow of the gospel had been one way, from the West to the rest of the world. Europe sent missionaries to Africa. America sent missionaries to Asia. That was the assumed direction of how the gospel reached Africa and beyond. Nigeria broke that assumption completely. By the late 20th century, Nigerian churches were sending their own missionaries to Europe, to North America, to the ends of the earth. There are today more Nigerian-founded churches in London than British-founded churches in Lagos. The river had reversed its course. What caused this? Historians point to several factors: the independence movement, the trauma of the Biafran War, rapid urbanization that left millions searching for community and meaning. But Nigerian Christians themselves give a simpler answer. God was moving. And perhaps both things are true at once. What is undeniable is the result. A Christianity growing in Nigeria at a speed and scale that has permanently shifted the center of gravity of the global church. The future of Christianity is not in Europe. It is not in North America. According to virtually every major study of global religion, it is in the global South, and Nigeria is at its beating heart. The largest Christian nation in Africa faces its greatest crisis. Here is a number that puts everything in perspective. Nigeria today has over 80 million Christians, making it one of the largest Christian populations on the entire planet. And yet, At the same exact moment, Nigeria is also the country where more Christians are killed for their faith than anywhere else in the world. Not North Korea, not Iran, not Syria, Nigeria. The same country that sends missionaries to Europe. The same country with the largest church on earth. The same country whose gospel story we've been telling for the last 4 chapters. Light and shadow, existing not side by side, but inside each other. The source of much of this violence is a complex collision of religion, ethnicity, and political power that has been building for decades. In the north, extremist groups have waged campaigns of terror against Christian communities, burning villages, destroying churches, displacing hundreds of thousands of families from land their ancestors had farmed for generations. In the Middle Belt region, the tension between mostly Christian farming communities and mostly Muslim herding groups has produced cycles of violence that have claimed thousands of lives. These are not simple stories of religious hatred. They are deep, layered conflicts where faith, land, survival, and identity are all tangled together in ways that resist easy answers. And yet, and this is the part that demands attention, the church in Nigeria is not retreating. It is not shrinking. It is not losing its voice. In the same villages where churches have been burned, new ones are being built. In the same communities that have suffered devastating loss, pastors are preaching forgiveness and leading their congregations forward. Christianity in Nigeria has always grown under pressure, from the colonial era, through the Biafran War, through decades of political instability. Persecution has never once succeeded in silencing it, and there is no sign that it will now. What Nigeria's story ultimately teaches us is something that echoes across every episode of this series. Faith that has been tested is faith that cannot easily be shaken. The gospel that arrived in the hands of a freed slave, that survived colonialism, that exploded into the largest church on earth, that reversed the direction of global missions, that gospel is still moving, still advancing, still finding people in the most unlikely places and transforming them from the inside out. The gospel reached Africa, and Africa sent it back to the world, and the world has never been the same. We have walked through 5 chapters of one of the most extraordinary stories in Christian history. We saw a land full of ancient kingdoms, 401 Yorùbá deities, and a powerful Islamic north. Soil that was anything but empty when the gospel arrived. We saw a 15-year-old boy taken in chains across the Atlantic and come back decades later as a bishop, carrying a Bible in his mother tongue. We saw Nigerian believers face down colonialism, separate Jesus from the empire that brought him, and build something genuinely, powerfully their own. And then we saw what happened when that fire was unleashed. Pentecostalism exploding across a nation, churches growing from dozens to tens of thousands. A country that once received missionaries now sending them to London, to New York, to the ends of the earth. The river of the gospel reversing its course completely. Nigeria didn't just receive Christianity in Nigeria, it reimagined it and sent it back to a world that desperately needed to see what faith looks like when it is truly free. Today, Nigeria carries both the glory and the weight of that story. Over 80 million Christians, the largest congregation on earth, and at the same time, the country where more believers die for their faith than anywhere else in the world. Light and shadow. But through it all, The gospel is still moving. The church is still standing. And the story that began with a boy in chains is still being written. One life, one community, one courageous act of faith at a time. If this story moved you, if it changed the way you see Africa, the church, or the unstoppable movement of the gospel, then share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because every country in this series has a story just like this one. A story of faith arriving in impossible circumstances and refusing to be stopped. The trail doesn't end here. Subscribe, share this story, and we'll see you in the next episode.